I'm going to read 5 ways China's slowdown will ripple across the globe. The reaction was slow in coming. The financial markets and corporate policies have been jolted awake to China's relentless growth decline and are scrambling to cope with wrenching changes in global business. For the past decade, China poured money into building new factories, highways, and apartment blocks that propelled explosive growth at home and a flood of money to exporters of iron ore and other commodities such as Australia and Peru. But now Beijing has put the brakes on that boom, like a captain turning a heavy ship in choppy seas. Its leaders are trying to steer the world's second-largest economy away from reliance on investment and toward being a consumer society. Growth has marched steadily downward over the past 2 years as Beijing clamped down on a spending boom that analysts worry has pushed debts to dangerous levels. That has linked less Chinese demand for imported goods from copper and cement to factory machinery and earth movers. China is far from falling off a financial cliff, but last year's 7.7% growth was barely half of 2007's 14.2%. Global stock markets slide after an unexpected fall in January factoring drew attention to the depth of the slowdown. Growth looks set to fall further amid weakness in trade, retail sales, and manufacturing. The growth slowdown this year will be faster than any expect, said economist Diana Ng of Lombard Street Research in a report. Already, slumping Chinese demand has led to job cuts at mines in Australia and elsewhere. Other companies that look to China to drive revenues are cutting sales forecasts. Some have pulled out and profits are down, possibly endangering jobs abroad. As for Chinese companies that face tougher competition at home, that, combined with weaker investment, could lead to job or wage cuts if Beijing fails to manage the challenges of its transition. That might hurt consumer spending, leading to a downward spiral. It will then become a race to the bottom, said Ng. A look at losers and possible winners from China's slowdown. Commodities. China's voracious appetite for commodities propelled a boom in Australia and emerging economies in Africa and Latin America. With revenue down, exporters are cutting jobs and governments are tightening their spending. The International Monetary Fund has reduced its 2014 growth forecast for South Africa, Brazil, and Middle East and Southeast Asia. Caterpillar Incorporation has cut 13,000 jobs, blaming slower Chinese growth and weak spending by miners, and says it will cut more. Hardest hit by the poor countries in Africa or Latin America that might have to cut ambitious plans for spending on education and other social programs. Foreign companies. Global companies have long seen China as one of their most promising markets and most frustrating. China is the biggest market for AG and some other automakers, Brands, the US-based operator of Pizza Hut, KFC, and Taco Bell, already get half its revenue from China, but US and European companies are being squeezed by together competition by Beijing's efforts to limit access to promising industries such as clean energy. Cosmetics brand Rimmel Incorporation says it will put out of China. Actavis plc, a generic drug maker, is leaving too. Sales of Swiss watches in China fell last year after an anti-corruption crackdown crimped gift-giving. The Communist Party has promised to open more industries such as internet commerce and logistics to foreign competitors, but previous market opening initiatives have been tempered by conditions that include handing technology to potential Chinese competitors. Autos. China buoyed the global auto industry after the 2008 crisis. It passed the United States as the world's biggest car market in 2009, and annual sales still are rising by double-digit rates. But growth is decelerating sharply. That steps up pressure on China's fledgling automakers, while global rivals add to their market share. Sales by independents grew by 11.4% last year, slower than the overall market at 50.7%. Their market share slipped by 1.6 percentage points to 40.3%. This year's market growth is due to slow to about 10%. Independents will face increased pressure to merge or close. Chinese acquisitions abroad. Squeeze at home. Chinese companies might try to sharpen their competitive edge by acquiring foreign brands and technology. Past acquisitions include Volvo Cars, Club Med, and American meat packer Smithfield. Last month, Beijing-based Naval Group brought part of IBM Corporation's server business and Motorola mobile phone business from Google Incorporation. Possible winners. One bright spot is Beijing's effort to encourage consumer spending. China's market for consumer-oriented goods such as wheat from Brazil, soybeans from Minnesota, and French wine is growing. Such sales could accelerate if Beijing can persuade households to spend more. Also, suppliers to fill the Communist Party is promoting such as healthcare, energy efficiency, and pollution control could see more opportunities. I'm going to read Time Running Out on Former Sex Slaves Quest. A single picture captures the regret, shame, and rage that Kim Jong-ja has harbored through most of her 89 years. Dressed in a long white wedding gown, she carries a bouquet of red flowers and stares at the camera. Her deep wrinkles obscured by makeup and a diaphanous veil. A local company arranged wedding-style photo shots as gifts for Kim and other elderly women at the House of Sharing, a museum and nursing home for South Koreans forced into Brussels by Japan during World War II. Kim and many of the other women never married. giving the pictures a measure of bitterness. That could have been my life. Meet a man, get married, have children, have grandchildren. Kim sat in her small, tidy room at a nursing home south of Seoul. But it never happened. It could never be. Japanese soldiers stole her yacht, she says, and now the Japanese are waiting for us to die. There are only 55 women left who register with the South Korean government as former sex slaves from the war, down from a peak of more than 230. Their average age is 88. As their numbers dwindle and rising Japanese nationalism provokes anger from war victims in South Korea and China, the 10 women who live at the house of sharing know they're running out of time to pressure Tokyo to make amends. Once the victims are gone, Kim said, who will step in and fight for us? At first glance, the women might seem an obstacle to soothing the decade-old war tensions between Seoul and Tokyo. I want the Japanese to come here, kneel before us, state everything that they did wrong to each one of us, and apologize. Said 88, showing that she said were sword wounds from Japanese soldiers on her arms and feet. But the women may also be the last chance for America's two most important Asian allies to settle a dispute that has boiled over in recent years. As more of the so-called comfort women die, and Tokyo and Seoul trade increasingly bitter comments about their bloody history, it will be much harder to solve or more realistically mitigate the issue after these women pass away. Robert an Asia specialist at Temple University Tokyo campus, said in an email, "Now there are people, the former sex slaves, to apologize to. Afterward, there will be no one left to receive the apology." Some historians say that as many as 200,000 Asian women, mostly Korean but also Chinese and others, were forced into Japanese military brothel system during the war. Japan has apologized many times over the years, including a landmark 1993 statement by then Chief Cabinet Secretary that acknowledged Japan's responsibility over military brothels and says wartime documents, statements, and other records were enough to assume many women were deceived or forced into them. Some past premiers have also written letters of apology to the women, but many South Koreans see the repeated apologies and past efforts at private compensation as insufficient. One big reason is because they've been consistently undermined by the incendiary comments of many Japanese politicians, officials, and right-wing activists. The new head of Japanese public broadcaster NHK, for example, recently downplayed the issue by saying the use of women as military prostitutes was common worldwide during the war. Despite testimony from many of the women, Japanese nationalists have said there's no clear evidence proving the military or government systematically used coercion to recruit them. Many average Japanese are sympathetic to the women, but some also see a steady politicization politicization of the issue by South Korean lawmakers and activists stoking anti-Japanese anger. In Japan, the comfort women issue is now seen as a large part of a Korean moral philosophical assault on Japan that includes a territorial dispute over inlets in the sea between the countries and other issues that both sides have increasingly taken to international audiences, says Robert Kelly, a political scientist at National University in South Korea. The political leaders are also loggerheads. Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has previously questioned past apologies and expressed hope for revision, although he later promised to stick with them. Following criticism, he also recently visited a shrine that honors Japan's war dead, including convicted criminals. South Korean President Park Geun-hye, the daughter of the late dictator widely seen as pro-Japanese, has vowed a tough line until Abe does more to acknowledge his country's wartime past. Anger in Seoul is met by frustration in Tokyo. The Japanese seem to be of the view that whatever they do will not be enough to satisfy the Koreans. So why bother? Said Ralph Koza, president of the Pacific Forum CSIS think tank in Hawaii. At a house of sharing, the women spend their days watching TV, exercising, meditating, and talking with volunteers, including regular Japanese visitors and the occasional U.S. politician and media crew. Many are sick, but several are active, making plans to give public testimony in Japan and the United States, and to take part in protests. A weekly demonstration in their honor has been held in Seoul for more than 20 years. Some of the women suffer from mental disorders and sexually transmitted disease from the war, according to manager of the home. There's also shame and bitterness. My life has been ruined. Even though I managed to survive and return home, I feel like my fellow Koreans will point their fingers at me if they discover my past, even though that what happened to me was against my will, said an 87-year-old who would only give her surname, Kim, because of embarrassment. I don't even want to go outside. At a museum near the women's living quarters, a large map of Asia is marked with dozens of comfort stations, from northern China to Indonesia in the south, identified through official documents and testimony from former sex slaves and soldiers. Nearby is a cramped rough wood paneled room intended to recreate the women's working conditions. It's lit by one dim electric bulb. A wooden bed with a thin mattress is the only one furniture. Small wooden placards carved with the Chinese female names given to the sex slaves hang on hooks on an outside wall. I am not looking for a reward. A reward is given to a needy, who was kidnapped at 15. I'm asking for compensation for the Japanese who beat and stabbed me, for those who made me bleed. We came back as criminals. I'm going to read about troop departure weighs on U.S. aid in Afghanistan. Uncertainty over how many U.S. troops might remain in Afghanistan beyond this year has trickled down to American diplomats and aid workers, whose efforts to develop the still mostly primitive country face a drawn down of their own because of security fears. In boosting security forces, educating young girls, launching mobile phone technology, and providing other aid, the U.S. has allocated nearly $100 billion since 2002 to build Afghanistan after generations of war and isolation. But the State Department's ability to continue aid programs or start new ones hinges largely on Afghanistan's security and whether officials can travel to project sites to make sure that the money is being spent wisely. A long-delayed decision on whether as many as 10,000 American forces will remain in Afghanistan after the war ends this year will determine whether how deeply the aid will be cut. It's an all too familiar pattern of anxiety for diplomats who saw years of development projects in Iraq wither away after U.S. troops withdrew in 2011 because of reduced resources and increased security threats. It was not particularly pleasant to have to take a very large program down to a very small program in a very short period of time, said Assistant Secretary of State William Bromfield, who oversaw a gutting of State Department aid to Iraqi police forces 2 years ago. Violence in Iraq has surged ever since. Bromfield told reporters that last week he is already anticipating fewer personnel and fewer funds for local legal programs in Afghanistan, including fighting drug traffic and helping prosecutions and prison systems. But he's waiting to see how many security forces might remain before he can predict how deep the cuts will be. My intent is to have established a policy and strategy that can adjust to these realities without having to do the savage surgery that I was required to do in Iraq in 2012, Bromfield said. He said Congress already is seeking to cut all foreign assistance to Afghanistan by half. U.S. lawmakers are too aware of tough balance between inevitable budget cuts and trying to keep a U.S. foothold in Afghanistan after more than 12 years of war. There's a credibility question, said Sam Bob Casey, DPA, who until last summer chaired a panel on South and Central Asia on the Senate's Foreign Relations Committee. We have plenty of reasons to make sure when the military engagement ends that we really maintain both a diplomatic presence and strategy. However, he said, it's very hard for most taxpayers to support keeping a large military presence in Afghanistan. Negotiations over whether foreign military forces should remain in Afghanistan after the combat mission ends in December have snared over Afghan President Hamid Karzai's refusal to sign a secretary agreement with the United States. Without the U.S. security agreement, allies have said NATO forces would not remain in Afghanistan. On Monday, the U.S. Agency for International Development announced a $300 million package of aid to bolster Afghan agriculture projects and provide administrative degree programs at universities. It also will build on Afghan trade and tax programs to ultimately help gain accession to the World Trade Organization. Larry Sampler, who heads USAID operations in Afghanistan and Pakistan, said in an interview that if the new programs are unable to be properly monitored, we'll pull the plug. But he said USAID has years of experience working in pretty dodgy places and described a number of ways to make sure the money is properly spent, even if American officials are unable to personally visit project sites due to security threats. We are not dependent on international military forces anywhere in the world like we have been Afghanistan, Sampler said, and as international military forces leave, Afghanistan will more closely be resembling a normal operating environment for USAID. USAID has spent just over $13 billion on Afghan development since 2001. The money has opened schools to girls, provided health care across the country, and created a cell phone alert system for Afghans to get immediate access to everything from market prices for their crops to their government paychecks. In all, the U.S. has allocated $96 billion to build up Afghanistan, more than half of it to train and equip the nation's estimated 344,000 security forces. Continued support for the Afghan troops, which are expected to grow by another 8,000, will be a key predictor to the country's stability after 2014. While there are still American troops in the field, you get funding for the troops. If American troops aren't there, the administration's ability to sustain funding for the Afghan national security forces gets a lot more problematic, said Stephen Battle, a national security and defense expert at the Council on Foreign Relations. And if that goes away, the whole show collapses. Battle said, it's very hard to imagine road projects, well, schools, clinics, the kinds of things we've been sinking into money into, surviving in that kind of environment. By 2015, officials predict that American aid workers, investigators, auditors, and other non-specified U.S. employees will be able to get to only 21% of Afghanistan, down from nearly 50% in 2009. The Special Inspector General for Afghanistan Reconstruction said the new limits were the result of the drawdown of U.S. troops. When American forces left Iraq at the end of 2011, the U.S. Embassy in Baghdad found itself with neither the resources that the military had nor the ability to travel much of the country. They also lost what former Ambassador James F. Jeffrey in an interview called a buy-in from the Iraqi government to continue on its own the programs that the U.S. troops had begun. Based on my experience in Iraq, we risked failure in Afghanistan if we do not have a continued U.S. military presence and have to rely on only an embassy to continue comprehensive nation building, security assistance, and counterterrorism, Jeffrey said.